I've gotten several requests to make a DPS tier list, so here we are. But I'll be going about this differently from most tier lists. Typically, tier lists will place characters in lettered or numbered tiers like S, A, and B or so on, but that's kinda arbitrary and not all that useful in my opinion. Plus, when making tier lists, it's kinda hard to minimize personal bias from the equation. So, the way I'm going about this instead is, the tiers I'll be placing the characters in are grouped based on how much DPS the strongest team calcs at under the investment standard that I use, which in short, this is with higher subsets than Kaching main standards, which is the standard most theory crafters use, and all characters that are my standard are triple crowned. There's one 5-star weapon on the team, and 5-star characters that we can now get a free constellation on, these are calced at C1. Basically, my standard is meant to give a better depiction of what someone would reasonably be able to get over time on their main DPS teams. And one quick disclaimer before we start, some of the characters and your teams could possibly be optimized better in my calcs, and if you think they possibly could, let me know in the comments and I'll look into it. So starting off, the first tier we have is for characters with less than 90,000 DPS. Comparatively, this is the tier that I would consider to be bad by current standards. And first in this tier we have Child. Unfortunately, Child has always calced low even for standards at the time when his team was considered meta. DPS standards have increased substantially since then, while he's basically gotten nothing new to work with since Kazuha, so it's really no surprise that he's this low. And next is Klee, using our forward Vaporize team with Farina, where Farina vaporizes off Klee's super fast pyro application. The other two in this tier are Noel and Kaching, with Noel using a nefer team with Farina and Chilonin, Kaching using a Lunar Charge team with nefer, Farina, and Jean. I did try Llama Hyperbloom for Kaching, but this pure Lunar Charge team was stronger. But the next tier is characters between 90 and 100,000 DPS. This is the range that I would consider to be below average. It's not bad per se, but it's also definitely not good either, and their performance will likely not feel great compared to most other DPS. And in this range, we have Ito, using the same team I had for Noel with nefer, Farina, and Chilonin. This counts a lot better than Double Hydro for Ito, because nefer is a way stronger character than Yelan. Then we have Yoimiya using Double Cryo Melt with Seedlally, Escoffier, and Bennett. If you aren't familiar with this, Seedlally and Escoffier make a great duo for forward melt teams that either wouldn't be able to melt with solo cryo, or could get more melts from the extra cryo. So you get melt, cryo resonance, and Escoffier doing high sub DPS damage while only taking about a second of build time since she doesn't burst. This was quite a nice buff to Yoimiya's numbers. At the top of this list, we have Aoife at 97,000 DPS with his nefer driver team of nefer, Farina, and Auroron. So this is basically just an nefer hyper carry team with Aoife as the driver utilizing his buffs. Now for most of the remaining tiers, the goal here is to have DPS ranges of roughly 15%, not all exactly 15%, but I tried to get clean numbers as close to it as possible, so I feel this is a reasonable range to consider characters the same tier as each other. So we have a tier of 100k to 115k DPS. This tier has the most characters of all of the tiers by far, so it's the range where I consider the characters in it to be average DPS. These characters are definitely not bad, and can actually be pretty solid, just that by today's standards, their numbers are nothing special and there's quite a number of DPS ahead, some far ahead. At the start of this tier, we have Eula using an Escoffier team with Shenhe and Farina. The team doesn't do much to maximize Eula's physical damage, but Escoffier is a really good character, so it's Eula's best team regardless. Plus triple cryo is nice for Eula's energy. And then we have Ayato, another Escoffier team, this one triple Hydro with Ayato driving Yelan. Ayato and Eula are both characters that historically I think most of us would have expected to be a tier or two lower than this, but Escoffier is broken and they can use her. Next is Navia with her double Pyro team of Mavrika, Bennett, and Chilonin. She can also do double Hydro with Farina and Yelan, but double Pyro counts higher, so I went with this. Then we have Raiden and her new Hyperbloom team of Llama, Nefer, and Xingqiu. I'm using double Electro instead of double Hydro here for several reasons. First, if you used Yelan instead of Nefer, there's no sustain. Plus, Xingqiu is plenty enough Hydro for Hyperbloom by himself. And having double Electro does also help get more Hyperblooms too. Then nefer is just way stronger of a character than Yelan, even factoring in the loss of crits on the Hyperblooms, so using her here just makes way more sense. Then after Raiden we have Xiao, and here we have nefer showing up yet again with nefer, Yelan, and Faruzan. This team might look bizarre, but nefer genuinely just does so much damage that having her sub DPS outvalues the high buffing of the FFXX team. Plus, the rotation is shorter since nefer doesn't burst here. Note that Xiao's numbers here are assuming 100% collisions. He'd be a tier lower with less, but collisions are usually reliable enough in single target to reasonably calc this. And then Wanderer is next with his current team of Farazan, Bennett, Farina. If he was C0, the highest calcing team for him would be the same as Xiao with Yelan and nefer, but because of the free constellation, he can be calced at C1, which is enough of a damage increase for the better buffing on him to be better than the Taser team. Then we have 3 more Alarma teams, Sethos, Nilu, and Sino. Note that these numbers are for a single target, so Nilu could be higher if they were calced for AoE, she'd shoot up a tier or 2 in that case. And for Sethos, keep in mind his numbers here rely on being able to do walk cancels, as he runs into terrible stamina issues if doing dash cancels. Then we have Linny and Overvape with Farina, nefer, and Bennett. Using Shalonen is basically the same DPS, but if you can, you want to use nefer because of how much having a shield helps Linny's practicality. It's a lot less personal damage on Linny, but nefer's sub DPS damage compensates. And then there's Alhaitham using Quick Bloom with Llama, Kuki, and Farina. You'll just want to keep in mind that the DPS here is relying on long rotations with a lot of precise swaps. If you swap at the wrong times or to the wrong characters, that can result in considerably less DPS than what is shown here. Then we have Wriothesley and Freeze with Farina, Escoffier, and Shenhe. Unfortunately, C1 Shenhe doesn't buff Wriothesley nearly as much as the other Cryo DPS, which is why he's lower than them. Then Luke is next using his Melt Plunge team of Lali, Farina, and Bennett. These numbers assume 7 melted plunges, which can require tight timing, and you'll lose a lot of DPS if you can't pull it off. The team is also known for having pretty bad energy issues in practice, so keep that in mind as well. Next is a character that might be surprising to see this high, but it's C6 Kaya and the Escoffier Freeze team. At C6, Kaya actually does pretty solid damage while not needing to be on field, allowing for flexible rotations, which in turn allows for Shenhe's C1 to be used very well. His damage can be even higher in AoE or multi-wave, when you can use his C2, but since it doesn't work in pure single target, I don't have it calced here. At the top of this tier is another character that might come as a surprise, Tighnari, using double Electro with Ino, nefer, and Yai, so basically a dual carry team where you drive on Yai in Tighnari's downtime. They're able to still get Lunar Charge since Tighnari is only on field applying Dendro for a few seconds, so not enough time to remove the Thundercloud. You will just want to keep in mind that for the DPS to be this high, you need to perform rather precise short rotations. Moving on to the next tier, this range is 115k to 130k DPS. At this range, this is above average, and all of the characters here are good, if not pretty darn great. And first here is that boy Jamal, using the same Melt Plunge team as the Luke. While Jamal helps very well, you just keep in mind he can have similar practical issues to the Luke, primarily the energy issues, but even more so since Jamal actually needs his burst unlike the Luke. And then there's Chaska, and her highest calcing team is Overvape with Eonsan, Farina, and Bennett. The thing to keep in mind with Chaska's numbers is mainly that they can really vary depending on your bullet RNG. In some rotations she might perform better than she calcs, others she may perform worse. If you're in AoE, as we know, her numbers go down by a lot since her damage gets divided between the enemies. Chloride is next with her Overload team of Mavrika, Eonsan, and Chevres. Not a whole lot extra to say, there's not much reason for this team to not perform as well as it calcs. Hu Tao is next. She got a big upscale from being capped at C1 now since, as we know, her C1 is a big damage increase. She also now has a new best team, which is Overvape with nefer, Yelan, and Ino. She gets decent-ish buffs from everyone in the team, while having high sub-DPS damage from nefer and Yelan. Do just keep in mind that if you aren't careful with your timings, it is possible to miss some vapes on Hu Tao here, especially if your Ino isn't C2. Next is Mualani with Shalonen, Mavrika, and C1 Mona. Mona is used as the 4th slot because she provides High Resonance 15 vape damage from her C1, which all of Mualani's damage will get, and that increases Mualani's damage by about 12% or so, and you can get Mona's Omen buff on Mualani's first Shark Bite, while also getting it on Mavrika's vape burst, allowing her to do really high damage as well. Then there's Nuvalet. His current highest calcing team is Hyperbloom with Farina, nefer, and Llama. Then after Nuvalet, we have Arlecchino. Like Hu Tao, she's also using a new Overvape team with nefer and Ino, but unlike Hu Tao, she can use Ino as solo Hydro, though you might need C2. This allows Bennett to be used instead of Yelan, but keep in mind if you're facing enemies that get knocked around easily, you can end up knocking them out of Ino's burst radius, or Bennett's, or both. Also keep in mind that Arlecchino's personal damage is lower here than in Melt, so if you have a constellated Arlecchino, you may want to stick with Melt. As for the top of this tier, it might be a bit of a surprise, but it's actually Ganyu using the Escoffier Freeze team. He's able to calc this high because C1 Shenhe is huge for her since she can rotate around it, plus Ganyu's own C1 is actually pretty decent here since it's buffing both her and Escoffier's damage at the same time. Now for the next 2 tiers, all of these characters are very powerful and can be considered top tier DPS. So first, in the 130k to 150k tier, we have Ayaka. Like Ganyu, being able to calc C1 Shenna was also huge for Ayaka's numbers, though unfortunately she doesn't have a good C1 of her own to calc like Ganyu does. But of course, with Ayaka calcs, you have to keep in mind if enemies aren't frozen, there's always the concern of them moving away from her burst, and Ayaka losing a lot of damage from that. And then there's Kanich. He was able to calc this high because I used a team of Kanich, Emily, Eonsan, and Bennett. There's no off-field pyro here, but if you're against just a single wave of enemies, as long as there's no other element that removes pyro aura, your Dendro application can maintain burning even without off-field pyro, and thus Bennett can be used in this scenario. But if you're facing more than one wave of enemies, then this team will naturally perform considerably worse than the numbers shown. Also keep in mind that these numbers are assuming Kanich gets 5 cannon in rotations with his burst and 4 without. It is possible to get 6 cannons, which would essentially make him a calc a tier higher, but I haven't heard of anyone being able to do this consistently and reliably, so we're going with 5. Then at the top of this tier we have Varessa. We all know her best team of Traverse, Eonsan, and Mavrika. She gets hyper buffed by 2 of the strongest buffers in the game via Traverse and Eonsan, while having some of the highest sub DPS from Mavrika, so that plus Varessa's high scaling, it's only natural that she's this strong. And then in the next tier of up to 150k to 170k DPS, we have both new Notcry DPS, those being Flins and Nefer. Flins is using his Lunar Charge team of Ino, Sucrose, and Nefer. Only real thing of note here is that Ino's only had 1 banner, so not many people have her C6 yet. And then Nefer, she's not out yet, so keep in mind there could be some new discoveries and her best team could end up different with either higher or lower numbers than shown, but currently it's looking to be Larma, Ino, and Nefer. But there are other good options than Nefer, such as Nahida, Cookie, or Zhongli for that 4th slot that all count similarly. There is one similar issue as with Flinch though, which is not many people are going to have C6 Ino, especially since she's not on Nefer's banner, but the DPS will still be really high even without it. Finally, we reach the highest tier, which I currently have as just anything above 175,000 DPS. At this point, the DPS is just so much higher than the average that the characters here are just straight up broken. And as you'd expect, it's Mavrika and Skark. Currently, I have Skark at 187,000 DPS in her premium freeze team with Farina, Escoffier, and Shenhe. This is an extremely powerful team. The main thing to note is Skark is locked into pure freeze, which could be bad for some enemy mechanics, but Skark does so much damage she can usually just power through anyway. And Shenhe doesn't actually buff Skark by that much, so there's still room for a better future teammate. Then Mavrika, I've recently updated my calcs on her to a new and improved combo discovered by my friend and fellow theory crafter Butterfur. This combo gets a lot of melts on her CA finisher. It results in her now calcing at 200,000 DPS with the Yatsan, Seedlally, and Bennett. Funny enough, there's also a strong new combo for her Overload team of Chevres, Yatsan, and Auroron, which gets that team to 191,000 DPS, so very close to melt and still higher than every other team in the game. And that's everything, so to recap, here's the full list. I'll be making updated videos on this list every few patches or so as we get notable shakeups or additions to the meta, so let me know if you found this approach helpful or enjoyable, and any comments or suggestions you may have on it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more quality theory crafting. Thanks, and goodbye.